Good morning. We are here on day 5 in Ghana. Like I said, we're on the Cape Coast. Today should be going towards the slave castles and I think one other place, but I'm not 100% sure yet. He said he'll determine that when he gets here, our guide Isaac. So let's see what today brings. The hotel, or I guess resort we stayed at, was interesting. Shower didn't work properly, so hopefully we can get that figured out by the time we make it back, so I can actually get real clean. Still feel a little dirty, but yeah, let's keep getting it in Ghana. All right, so a little update on what we're doing. We're not gonna go to Cape Coast Castle today. We're gonna go to the Elmina Castle. The only difference was one was built in the 15th century, the other one was built in the 14th century. Because we're all gonna be doing something, I guess, a little bit more exciting. And if you continue with the video, you'll see what that is. But yeah, so right now we're just on the coastline. This Elmina is apparently the oldest city in Ghana, where the first white man landed. So we're just here taking a couple pictures before we head over to the castle. So let's continue to see what we discovered here in Elmina. Right, so now we are actually in Elmina Castle. Our guide is about to give us a tour and we're gonna learn about everything that happened here. But this is the first stop of the day. So continue with me so we can actually learn about the history of this place.
Personally, before I start the tour, I am much more concerned about the language that sometimes some of us use to represent a rare history. As you speak today, many people refer to this structure as a castle. But the question is this a castle or a slave dungeon? I'm sure at Cape Coast Dungeon you heard several words, castle, which should not be used to represent a rare history. The second question is were our ancestors slaves, or they were enslaved Africans or captives? It is so sad and disheartening to see that many people, as we speak today, will come here and they see the word slaves to represent the pains, the suffering that our ancestors went through. Sometimes when I hear statements of such, I become so disheartened because the sugar-coated history is always out there. But the time has come for the rare history to be told as it happened. Marcus Garvey once said, a people without the knowledge of their own past history, origin, or culture is like a tree without roots. And Malcolm X also said, history is people's memory, and without it, a man is demoted to a lowest animal. But one simple question that we need to ask ourselves as individuals is this: if history is people's memory, then any memory that is not working to correct the system cannot describe itself as a functional memory. Why this quote? Why this statement? Today, as we connect ourselves to this dungeon, we are going to see how the journey of our ancestors began from this slave dungeon. Why Elmina Slave Dungeon? This was the first slave dungeon built by the Portuguese in the year 1482. As you speak, this dungeon is 541 years old. This is the oldest, the biggest, the largest, and the first to come into contact with the slave trade. Though apart from this slave dungeon, we have one at Cape Coast, built by the English in the year 1664 to 1665. We have one in Accra, Christian Box Slave Dungeon, built by the Danes in the year 1661, but the Portuguese first arrived here in the year 1471 for three main reasons: political, religious, and economic. Political in the sense that the Portuguese at that time wanted an area outside Europe where they could control, dominate, and extend their territories. Religious, was to propagate the gospel as they claimed to do so. And the key word over here is the word claimed. And I believe in the power of language as far as communication is concerned. You cannot say they worship God, while slavery was happening under their own worship. And for that matter, I prefer to use the word claimed to give a better distinction of what they thought they represent, but in reality, that was not the case. Economic, to enrich themselves with gold. Based on these reasons, they assembled a strong team of navigators, began the voyage. But the system of trade was barter, that is exchange of goods for goods. As a result, when they were coming from Portugal, they came along with European goods. Some of them included guns, gunpowder, used clothes, rum, mirrors, beads, Lagos, and among others in exchange for the gold, ivory, and later spices. By the rate at which the indigents of the community were giving them gold in exchange for some of these European goods created the impression that this town was full of gold. As a result, the Portuguese named this town Elmina, which simply means the mine, and the name was later corrupted into present-day Elmina. But the traditional name for the town before the coming of the Portuguese was a local name called Anumansa. Anumansa literally means inexhaustible supply of water, a name that gave self-identity to the people. Today is no more because of the corrupted name Elmina, which means that the people had lost their identity in advance. And as I speak today, for several years, the people are now being identified by the corrupted name Elmina. And that is so sad and pathetic. When they arrived in the year 1471, there was no structure like this for them to stay and do business. So they had their ship docked on the ocean. They had tents mounted on the shores, used local boats or canoes for their business transactions. But anytime there was a heavy downpour, wind or storm, it negatively impacted on their business, which created inconvenience for them. As a result, they requested for a land from then the chief in charge of the town. But their request for a land was turned or denied by the chief. He said, I quote, "It is better for people to be good friends when they are living apart than when they are living together." But the Portuguese never gave up. Why? They knew what they were looking for. They knew what they wanted. As a result, they kept on pursuing the chief. They persisted in their request. And it took the chief 11 years, from 1471 until 1482, before the land was released. Quickly, they mobilized themselves, came down with a team of artisans, and this structure was erected. Two incentives motivated the Portuguese to have this structure being built. One, it would help them to enjoy monopoly over the trade along the stretch of West African coast. Two, it would help them to protect themselves from external forces who would attack due to competition. Now let's take note of this development. While the Portuguese were trading in gold, it didn't take much time when the attention shifted to trading human beings. When Christopher Columbus, a man born in Italy in Genoa but spent most of his life in Spain, worked with the Spanish monarch for several years, Columbus indeed made 4 voyages. But in the first voyage, around 1490s, Columbus was heading towards India. He made use of the Atlantic Ocean. Due to navigational issues that he encountered on his way, he got lost, landing in the Bahamas in the West Indies. So he never set a foot on the American soil before he died. But today, what are we being told? The big lie is all over the world that he discovered America, of which in reality Columbus discovered nothing. And because he arrived on San El Salvador, because they thought they had reached India, they named the area the West Indies. Now when he arrived, that was when he and the rest of the Spaniards began to explore the native people over there, which coincided with the Europeans' elite high demand for sugar, which increased sugarcane plantation businesses. Again, the indigenous people were dying due to the mortalities, the overwork, and the diseases, which in the long run affected the indigenous population. There was a need for them to look for an alternative. A man named Bartolomeo de las Casas, who was a Spaniard at the same time a priest, suggested that Africans could be used as alternative to the situation. Now when he suggested, an experiment was carried out in Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and former Dominican Republic around 1512. Based on their own findings, three things came out of it. One, they said Africans were much more stronger. Two, they could resist the weather condition. Three, they were better alternatives to the indigenous because they seemed to be too weak. Then the demand for Africans on a large scale started. By 1590, officially, all the storage rooms over here were turned into slave dungeons, which meant that any African that would be captured later on would end up in the dungeons awaiting shipment. The Portuguese were in charge of this slave dungeon for 155 years, but that was not enough. In the year 1637, through a fight, the Dutch captured the structure from the Portuguese, continued the same evil trade for 235 years, almost 400 years. Both the Portuguese and the Dutch used this structure for evil trade. Enslaved Africans were captured from different areas in Africa, put them in chains and shackles, and they traveled on foot, crossing rivers, climbing mountains, hills to get to the dungeons. On their way to the dungeons, because of the distances, because of the mileage, some of them died. Others suffered from footsore wounds. Some of them became too weak or exhausted. As a result, as they got closer, there is a place called Asim Mountain where you have the slave river. They made a stopover in order for each captive to have the last bathe on their own soil. After bathing, they had their hair trimmed, they were shaved, they covered them with palm oil. Why? To disguise the sores and the wounds before putting them back in chains to this dungeon. Now from the slave river to this dungeon is even 40 kilometers. They walked on foot, arrived here, and what happened again? They did what you call physical examinations after the physical cleansing. How were they examined? They had their teeth inspected to determine the age category among them. They were forced to jump to separate those who had become too weak from those who were fit and strong. They had their stomach tapped. All these examinations took place just to separate the weak from the strong. And after these examinations, those who were fit and strong were auctioned, sent them into the dungeons awaiting shipment. As you saw from Cape Coast Dungeon yesterday, and as we are going to control from here, due to the unhygienic conditions of the dungeons, some of them also died. But any enslaved African who died in any of these dungeons ended up being thrown into the ocean, as the ocean became the receiving end of those who died on their own soil and in the dungeons. In the year 1872, the Dutch sold the structure to the British. Now, by the time they took over, several laws had already been passed by some European countries for the abolishment of the slavery, including US. For instance, in the year 1807, officially in British Parliament, they had a law passed for slavery to be abolished. 1814, the Dutch. 1815, Portugal. 1865, US officially also had a law passed. Unfortunately, illegal slave trade was still taking place. Why? Because of two main reasons. One, because of the investment, they were not ready to lose their assets. Two, because of the huge profit, they were not ready to lose it. As a result, it was difficult to end this contract, despite the laws being passed. But behind the scene, some of these European countries were having discussions to find an alternative to the laws being passed. One of the famous discussions that took place was the Berlin Conference in Germany. By the time the conference was over, the whole continent had also been partitioned. That is, they were done with the creation of the borders and the boundaries. And that gave birth to colonization. So someone would say from frying pan to fire, from slave trade. Colonization also came to replace it. And Ghana was colonized by the British. They used Cape Coast as a seat of their administration. This place became a sub-administrative center to Cape Coast. During World War II, the English recruited Africans from some English-speaking West African countries, brought them here, trained them as soldiers to fight for the British government in India and Burma. The soldiers were called Royal West African Frontier Force. They were here for 85 years until 6 March 1957. When we gained independence, we took over and we have been in charge for 66 years now. So 155 years for the Portuguese, 235 years for the Dutch, almost 400 years for slavery, 85 years for the British, 66 years post-independence. The structure that we are going to experience today is 541 years old. This is the oldest, the biggest, the largest, and the first to come into contact with the slave trade. Before I proceed with other information, if you have any question, sorry, regarding the introduction, you can ask. before we begin the tour. Thank you. For the enslaved Africans in the dungeons who were not cowards. Despite the pains or dehumanizing conditions, they were loud in fighting for their beliefs, in fighting for their freedom in the dungeons. They saw them to be a threat, regarded them as rebellious. As punishment, 6 strong ones were moved out of the dungeons, put them back in chains or shackles, brought them into the cell, locked the door as I have done, and they starved all of them to death. No food, no water. No enslaved African ever came into the cell and came out alive or survived. That is why we saw the skull and the crossbone, which has been there since and which represents death. Now this is Elmina Slave Dungeon. About 120 women were kept in this dungeon. We can see some clothes and chains on the floor. These are not the original clothes and chains used by those that were captured. But in the year 2016, less than 7 years ago, we had a reenactment program in this dungeon, where a group of Africans numbered about 60 volunteered themselves for the reenactment. The clothes were used to cover the private parts. The chains were put to themselves. And these participants slept in the dungeon for 12 hours. After 12 hours of reenactment, it was traumatic and terrible. Why? Mosquito bite was all over them. The stench alone was unimaginable. And people began to ask, if 12 hours in the dungeon in our day was so traumatic, what about enslaved Africans who had to be in the dungeons for a month, 2 months, or 3 months? Above this dungeon was a church built by the Dutch where they claimed to be worshiping God. This room is called the intersection room. Why intersection? For several days, weeks, a month, the dungeons, both sexes were separated. All the men were kept in the male slave dungeons. Women were held in the female slave dungeons, which means that husbands were separated from their beloved wives. Children belonged to opposite sex, were also separated from their parents. So as far as the dungeon's experience is concerned, both sexes could not see each other. Therefore, when the ship arrived, all the men who survived came to the passage that we used. The woman who survived came to the female passage. At that time, there was a wooden staircase here meant for each captive to come down. This was the only point that for the first time, both sexes from different areas or tribes could see each other for the first time. But they could not communicate among themselves. Why? They didn't know each other. Because of the different areas or tribes or regions that they would come from before they would be shipped. Now from this room from the intersection room, we proceed to the room of no return. Ago!
Amen.
Ago!
Amen.
Now this is the most sensitive experience of the whole tour. You cannot visit Daniel without seeing the room of no return. This is the room of no return. This is the gate, the door of no return. We can see how narrow, how tiny, smaller or little the size of the door is. One question that many people do ask is this: why this size of the door? Why too narrow? Why too tiny? Why too little? Three main reasons accounted for that. One was to control the enslaved Africans. Two, for easy count, so they would easily be counted to know the numbers that they were moved from the dungeons to the door. And the third reason was to dehumanize the Africans. But narrowing the door into the side did not suggest that enslaved Africans who were captured from their own side were not strong or fat. Some of them were strong people because Africans are known to be strong people. but due to the conditions that they were subjected to when they were captured, as they walked on foot for several days, weeks, and months, when little would be given to sustain them on their way, they were losing weight. In the dungeons, they lost further weight. So by the time the ship arrived, due to the weight loss, each captive would just fit through this door. At that time, the sea or the ocean was up here. So the ship docked some few meters away. They used wooden boats to transport them into the ship. They were parked in the holdings below them. Then the journey across the ocean began. Unfortunately, they never knew where they were going. They never knew how long the passage would take. The conditions on the boat ship, they had no knowledge about it. So there was no point that the air situation became better. Things always worsened from one point to the other. Today, as we started the tour from Kakum Dungeon, and as we proceeded to this place, if the walls have mouth to speak, they would have spoken better than me. Why? They saw the tears, the pains, the cries, but their voices were never heard by anyone. This reminds me of an old African proverb that says this: until the lions learn how to write its own story, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I repeat, until the lions learn how to write its own story, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Or in other words, until the lions have their own history, the hunter will always be a hero. The time has come for Africans to give a better narrative of themselves. The sugar-coated history is always out there, but the time has come that we have to tell the history as it's happened. If we do not tell our own story, nobody else will do it for us. As I said earlier, if today there haven't laws being passed that African history should not be taught in schools, it teaches me one lesson: that if all these structures are not preserved to today, many people have disputed that something of this nature never happened. Even if it happened, it's a myth. But now that we have all the evidence surrounding us on the west coast of Africa and in the plantations, what some people can do not talk about it. But the real Du Bois once said, now is the acceptable time. It is not tomorrow, it is not any convenience that our best work can be done. Now is the time for the history, the true narrative to be told as it happened. What is happening in my heart is this: the time for the thought is always not enough. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours will never be enough, because a lot happened, but little is said about it. As a result, before we end the talk, I'm going to recommend some books to you, which will help you to own the true narrative. In 1979, UNESCO designated the structure to be a World Heritage Site. Since then, people are encouraged to come to learn and to make sure that what happened should not be given the same privilege to repeat itself. Thanks for your time. It's a pleasure meeting you, a pleasure sharing my perspective with you, and whatever knowledge that you've gotten, take it back home and share. Thanks for coming. If you have any question for me or anything, please always call. Thank you.
So that was Elmina Castle, as our tour guide does like to call it, Elmina Slave Dungeon. This is another heavy portion of the video. For educational purpose, I'm definitely going to leave most of everything he said in, because I think it's very important knowledge to understand where our people came from, where our people were taken, the reasons why they were taken. So it's definitely something everyone needs to learn, especially African Americans that have never had the opportunity to be here. Let's keep going in Ghana. So we have stopped for lunch now. We are at Han's Cottage. This is where a lot of crocodiles are. So hopefully either before I get my food or after I get my food, I can show you where the crocodiles are. And I may even get to touch one, but we will see. Let's keep getting it. So only found one crocodile. I'm about to see how close I can get to it. I'm about to give y'all a little video. This is as close as I'm gonna get to it. Of course I'm zoomed in, but for some reason it won't close its mouth. So I'm gonna back away though, because I don't want it to come at me. That's the actual distance I am away from it, but I think that's about as close as I'm gonna get to this crocodile. I'm not sure if you can see now, it turned its head and moved. A couple other people got close to it and it decided to come at them. That's why I said, let me get further away from this thing before it comes at me. And luckily I wasn't over there. Oh, yep, it's coming at me now. I'm on the other side of a wall now, so I should be pretty safe.
My name is Dorothy and I'm your guide for this tour. So we are doing the canopy walkway. But it's the nature of our forest, we have to start with an exercise. So we'll be climbing a hill of 250 meters above sea level. Now please, as you go, if you want us to take a rest here, we have about 3 rest stops. So you can just stop for you to take some 2 minutes break. When we get to the boundary line, I'll brief you about Kakum National Park. Then after that point, we proceed to go and do the canopy walkway. So are you ready to experience the tour?
Yeah.
All right. That's the end of the exercise. So at this point, you have to take a rest. As you are taking the rest, I will just give you some brief information about the park, then we proceed. So currently we are standing at the boundary line. And we call this line a boundary line because it's the main point we cross that we enter the main conservation area. So from where we began our tour to this point, it's not part of the conserved area. This area covers an area of about 360 square kilometers. That's the Kakum Conservation Area. So we have Kakum National Park at the southern part right here, and Asina Chandanso Resource Reserve in the northern part. Our forest over here is being described as a moist, semi-deciduous tropical evergreen rainforest. So unlike a true forest that stays green, some of the plants inside the park at times shed off their leaves and regain them later. That's why we call it a semi-deciduous forest. And moist in the sense that the air inside the forest is saturated with water. Tropical because we are within the tropics. So the name Kakum was derived from the cry of the monkeys we have inside the park. So the mona monkeys cry like this: Kakum, Kakum, Kakum. So that's where we derive the name Kakum from. And then there is a saying in our local dialect that goes like this: Kakum, what's in the okweku enum, which means the sound Kakum can get to hear it from the mouth of a monkey. So this place was made a national park for 2 main reasons. The first was to protect the hard trees we have inside the park. That's from 1925. The government realized because of settlements, we're just cutting down trees anyhow. So they had to protect some place to be used by the future generation. The other reason was to protect the water source for the region. So we have 56 permanent streams and 47 temporary streams that take their source from the park. We also have 7 major rivers that flow through the park. So if you are to use the place for farming, then you are going to contaminate them with the farming activities. That's why we have to make it a national park.
So right now, we're in Kakum National Park. Kakum comes from the sound. Some monkeys that are found in this area, that's the sound that they make. So now, I'm on a suspension bridge over a high area. So I'm gonna stop this video now so I can pay attention. But yeah, let's keep going. So we made it past the first one. So I'm about to go through 5 more, I believe. So let's continue going. Let's see if we can make it all the way through without freaking out. Finally made it to the end on the last one. Oh, it was the journey. I'm definitely, my BPM is at 136 right now. So I was very nervous. But I'm glad we made it. I'm glad to take the experience. Good morning. It's our last day here at the Anamabo Beach Resort. We're not doing much today, just chilling on the beach today, and then we'll go out to dinner later. So I'm just gonna put this at the end of the last video as also a sign off for that one as well. So tomorrow we're gonna be leaving Cape Coast and going back to Accra, and then we can see what we can get into. Appreciate you if you continue watching the videos. I know some are kind of long, some are kind of heavy, some have been kind of fun, but yeah, like I said, appreciate you. Let's continue to get it in Ghana.